It was a novel experiment for someone like James Madison, because we have a country that's most pluralistic on earth. And he knew that. We were divided by race and religion, gender, economics, even classes that were inherited from other countries, and ones that were formed here. So he developed a country that would be based on a system of law that could be accepting and could in fact flourish that diversity. What he gave us, and the framers gave us, was a constitution that is a common article of faith that binds Americans. It's like a covenant, and we have it in common. No matter what we disagree on, no matter how hateful the debate may come, we have a common legacy found in that document. That's why it drives me crazy when the president keeps on referring to the fact that this is our defining moment. We had that defining moment in the 1700s. We had that defining moment when we agreed to a constitution that bound us all. And it required a leap of faith, a greater one than you're being asked to take today, a great leap of faith at the time, to believe not just that we could have this system that works, that honors and respects us all, but that we were going to go at it together. Now, I happen to believe we're living through a crisis of faith. That there are people in our government that for some reason have lost faith in that heritage. I don't understand it. You know, James Madison created the system, the Madisonian democracy, in a way that really didn't try to inspire you. You know, the U.S. Constitution is not an inspiring document. When people say how beautiful the U.S. Constitution is, I've always looked at them. It reads like the IRS code. There's nothing beautiful about it. It was written by a sort of a nerd, you know, a wonk. You know, James Madison was the sort of ultimate nerd of government. He was a, 5'4" with a squeaky voice, and you know, if he was alive today, he'd be inventing some .com in a garage. I mean, he was just not built for it. But he had one thing that was unique about James Madison, and that is he really was interested in government from a theoretical standpoint. He was fascinated by it, not just by how it worked, but how to create one to last. And he studied government. In fact, if you look back at some of the letters of the framers, they're wonderful. You know, there's a letter from Governor Morris saying, if James Madison lectures us one more time on the ancient Greek states, I'm never coming back. But what he created was this system that had enormous staying capacity. It's sort of like the all-terrain vehicle of systems. It'll take you anywhere you want to go. There's only one rule in the Madisonian system that can never be broken, and that is, you cannot go outside the rules. It's the only rule. So he built a system that is idiot-proof, and God knows we've tested that. But it's a system that is designed to survive. Many of you know that he said, look, if we were all angels, we wouldn't need a government. So he created a system that could be run by devils, could be run by people with the worst motivations, and still produce a majoritarian result, still produce this unique experiment. You just can't break the rules. You got to stay within them. You have to take the leap of faith. Now, I've been a big critic of this president, and that's an understatement of a lifetime. But I was critical of the last president, too. I guess I just don't like presidents. But you know, actually, it's interesting because I was a critic of Bill Clinton's and George Bush, and I wrote a column recently. I write for USA Today, and I wrote a column not long ago that said they're remarkably alike as individuals. The thing I disliked about Bill Clinton, I disliked about George Bush, and that they're relativists. Bill Clinton was a moral relativist. And you know what? George Bush is a legal relativist. He believes that the law is a technicality. He always has. It doesn't make him evil, it just makes him a man of zeal. And you know, Louis Brandeis once said the greatest danger to our country is not from evil-minded rulers from without, it's from overzealous men who act without understanding. Well, the reason I have been critical of George Bush and his administration is from the very beginning after 9/11, they started speaking of the Constitution as if it were the threat. And people like John Ashcroft questioned whether our Constitution could really face this new threat. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. This country has survived Challenges that would have reduced most countries to a fine pumice. And we're still here. You know, my colleague teaches for I work with an institute that, with the State Department, that brings people over to teach them about our system. And I've got a counterpart in France, and they try to, God help them, and adopt the French system. And Jerome Huet once told a group of diplomats that we were both the French and we were trying to capture. And he said, you know, Jonathan Turley is going to tell you about James Madison. James Madison. Well, the Madisonian democracy is an ugly system. And you know, it's the only thing Jerome ever said that I agreed with. It is an ugly system. But we have one thing to recommend us over the French system, which failed, by my count, about 24 times. We're still here. Hey, we've made mistakes, and we've had morons for leaders, but we're still here. Now, you would think that after 200 years, if there was one system on earth that would give faith to politicians, it would be ours. So the question then is, why after 9/11 was there this belief, this loss of faith by people like John Ashcroft and George Bush? And I would suggest that it has a lot to do with what happened before 9/11 than what happened at 9/11. You know, Dick Cheney recently admitted that when they came into office, they intentionally set a course to reinvent the office of the presidency. Mm-hmm. And 9/11 came around like right out of central casting. You had people like Viet Dim, John Yoo, others who had written for years that they wanted a new type of presidency and sort of uber president. And many of us dismissed those views as radical. But 9/11 happened. And so you probably can ask yourself, why? Why wouldn't the Bush administration go to Congress and ask for the authority of military tribunals? I was on the Hill back then working on the Patriot Act. I can tell you, they could have come and asked to hang Americans on meat hooks and Congress would have granted it. They were getting everything they wanted. And immediately, it was sort of an impulse buy environment. So why would they go and get the tribunal approval? Why would the president assert the authority to create a legal system that he alone designed, a prison system that he alone ran, a court system that he created by his own rules, and through this people could be held indefinitely and even put to death at his discretion? Why would you do that? And the reason I think is because there's an effort to reinvent the presidency. You see, the thing about James Madison and that ugly system he developed is that he developed a system of 3 branches where no single branch could govern alone. It's a maddening relationship. Because there's never been a Congress that didn't want to be president. There's never been a president that didn't want to be Congress. And we've always had judges that wanted to be both. And so they're continually fighting. But within these checks and balances, within this divided government, within this frustrating structure, we keep ambitions in check. And it is stable. What's occurred in the last few years is the greatest threat to the separation of powers in the history of this government. I truly believe that. The vision that the president's administration have put forward in court, it's not that it's an outrageous vision, and it's not a new vision. It's just not our vision. We rejected the idea of an all-powerful president and an all-powerful leader. We didn't need it. We took a leap of faith together. But you know, the crisis of faith extends beyond Congress and beyond this president. Congress has just completely failed to exercise oversight. I testified recently in the House Intelligence Committee, and the chairman of the committee admitted that they hadn't done any oversight in about 5 years. But what's happening is we're living in the age of relativism. We're afraid. And when you're afraid, the Constitution becomes an abstraction. You know, I got to tell you, people like me continually make speeches about this, but it is just completely useless. Because the other side just talks about inherent dangers. What if a bomb goes off? What if they poison our water? And then we're left with just abstractions. When you argue about enemy combatant, it's dangerous for a president to say he can take a U.S. citizen like Jose Padilla off the street, strip him of his constitutional rights, bar him from access to courts or to counsel, and hold him indefinitely. It's a position that is completely incompatible with our nature of government. But it still remains an abstraction, because we hear all the time of who these people are. The president was just talking about it recently when he talked about torture. We always hear how bad they are, but we never hear about who we are. We don't have to be reminded how bad they are. You know, the plane that hit the Pentagon exploded behind my car. I had just passed by it. It blew up into my rear view mirror. One of my friends was on that plane. I don't have to be reminded how bad they are. But we never talk about who we are. What happens when we win? And we will win. We'll be anything other than victorious. Who will we be? We're having a debate whether to embrace torture. There's a debate of whether we will endorse torture like waterboarding. Who are we? So we talk about a redefining moment. It's not a redefining moment in the sense of something that came before. It's a new definition of who we are. It's not the definition that we agreed on. You know, one of my favorite movies is Man for All Seasons, you know, with Thomas More. And there's this great scene where Thomas More is with his daughter, and the king has asked him to sign over, to agree to the authority that he wanted to divorce the queen. And Thomas More believed it was wrong legally and wrong morally, and he refused, and for that he would be put to death. And his daughter asked him, please, why don't you just sign the piece of paper? And you can continue to influence the king. And he told his daughter that we all hold ourselves, the essence of ourselves, in our hands like water. And as you get older, and as time wears you down, you loosen your fingers. And then someday you look down and there's nothing in your hands at all. Well, I think that war has a way of loosening our fingers. If you look at our worst injuries in history, you'll notice one thing in common. They're all self-inflicted. It's not the worst in terms of deaths like Pearl Harbor, 9/11. The worst ones are the things we did ourselves. The acts of self-mutilation, sending Japanese Americans into camps, the Palmer raids, and the rest. We did it because we were afraid. We loosened up our fingers. And when we finally came to, we realized there was nothing left. We had become something grotesque. So I will leave you with this. And it's the scariest quote I can give you. And I spend most of my time desperately finding a way to scare people. Because the other side does it so well. You know, I mean, we have a two-party system, which is not enough. And we have one party running on, we're the less of two evils. No other ideas beyond that. And then the Republicans are running on, vote for me, or you'll die. That's basically where we are. But, you know, far scarier for me is not another attack. And I've got children and a wife, and we live right here in the Capitol. And God knows the scariest thing for me personally would be if any of them were harmed. But the thing that scares me the most is that my generation will give away the legacy that we got from the generation that came before us. And that we will untether our civil liberties from the system that was created in the brilliance of the 18th century. And so the scariest quote for me is what Benjamin Franklin said when he was leaving the Constitutional Convention. And there was a great crowd and the windows were covered. And these people went up to Benjamin Franklin, and this woman stepped forward and she said, Mr. Franklin, what have you wrought? And Franklin stopped and said, it's a republic, madam, if you can keep it. To me, that's always been the scariest quote I've ever read, because it reminds us that it's ours to lose. That republic has within it the seeds of its own destruction. And if you just loosen your fingers, if you look the other way, if you do nothing, then we will be redefined. And we will no longer be the people we were. Thank you very much for having me today.